I want to welcome everyone to our new webinar on the blockchain from the Blockchain Security Standards Council. My name is Adam Rack. I'm the executive director for the organization. We'll be covering a number of different topics, starting with standards, our new updates to our node operation standard, and the release of our smart contract security standard. The Blockchain Security Standards Council is a nonprofit consortium comprised of leading companies in the industry focused on developing standards to drive more security and confidence in blockchain ecosystems. I encourage you to visit our website, www.blockchainssc.org, to learn more about what we're doing. So we'll go through, I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then we'll take Q&A after, so we'll be taking those. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. And with that, we'll get moving. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Claire Legal. Claire is a Senior Vice President for Integrity and Standards Security Solutions at MasterCard, and Claire is also one of our BSSC board members. John Neufeld is the Head of Legal, Compliance, and Policy at Open Zeppelin, and he is the editor for the Smart Contract Security Standard. And finally, we have Max Chesney-Mackey. He is a security architect and head of offensive security at Figment, and he's also the editor for the Node Operation Standards and the co-chair of the BSSC Tech Working Group. So I'm going to start actually with Claire. Claire, you've worked in the standards area for some time. MasterCard's clearly invested in supporting industry standards. What do you see as the main benefits of standards, and is there a risk that they stifle innovation?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. So from a MasterCard perspective, we view standards as key to trust, right? Trust cannot scale without standards. So I would say it is key to innovation in my mind. And especially when we think about blockchain, blockchain is not mainstream yet in the financial and institutional use cases. It is more experimental still. And so security in such an environment cannot depend on fragmented pieces or on-off judgments, or all of that is not going to help. We need common baselines among participants on how those things are going to be designed, how they're going to operate, how they're going to be assessed, how controls are going to be standardized and improved in a consistent way, right? The standards is what's going to allow all of the participants, big or small, right? And to be able to speak the same language, to be able to be on the same page so that we can actually innovate at scale. And that security is not an afterthought, right? I think many of us, hopefully on this call, know, that security it's not a single event. It's not a silver bullet. It's a continuous fight. It's a continuous raising of the bar. It's a continuous evolution. And so we have to make sure that this discipline is also brought within this environment. And this is the role that BSSC is playing, and trying to bring these standards to life so that we can have that common language and so that it can scale.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. So innovation can continue with these standards, and for us, the security bringing that confidence in the market. So John, let me jump to you on the smart contracts, because that's our latest standard that we've come out. Obviously smart contracts are super important, really critical for blockchain. They continue to grow as that grows and grows significantly. But it also makes them a target, right, for an attack as well. And how does this new security standard approach that? How does it help in developing more protection and more security with smart contracts?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and really excited to have the smart contract security standard live and in the public. I think it's super exciting now too that these standards and their development process are available for everyone in the community to get involved and to use and review. So, I think smart contract, we use that term generally although I would say it came from the Ethereum community, it's intended to be agnostic across blockchains, languages, and that's really, what allows all kinds of applications to be built and deployed on top of blockchain networks and those execution environments. And so it is a fundamental layer of the blockchain stack, you could call it. And I think historically that was where a lot of vulnerabilities, exploits, loss of funds were found. And the industry, I think, rightly focused on ensuring the logical correctness of the smart contract application layer historically through smart contract audits. And that practice was really a point in time third-party independent review of the smart contract application and trying to assess, will this application operate as intended? And that was very helpful, and it is still necessary. But I think what the smart contract security standard does is shows that's not sufficient. And although that point in time, you could think of it like a pen test in Web 2, where you have a third party who didn't develop the code, really comes in with the attacker mindset and tries to figure out novel ways that this could be disrupted or exploited. But what the smart contract security standard really does is show that security is a lifecycle approach. I love Claire's term earlier, there's no silver bullet for security. This really recognizes it's a holistic practice across the development lifecycle, the operational lifecycle, once that smart contract's deployed, how you interact with it, its functions, if you're upgrading it. So yeah, I think this just really reinforces to everyone building blockchain applications or testing the security of those they want to integrate with, that you can't rely on one security measure. Really good security, a strong posture is resilience across a multitude of controls.
No, that's really helpful, John. I think the approach of sort of, the audit and it's not sort of a one-time approach. It's sort of an ongoing effort that needs to happen is critical as the industry evolves and security continues to evolve in that aspect. So we've got our smart contract standard that's out. Max, you are the editor for the node operation standard. This is sort of V2 of that we had. The last one came out just over a year ago. Tell me sort of what's the difference between the two versions? How has it evolved? How do you see it continuing to evolve? I mean, assuming all our standards will continue to kind of try to keep making them better. So what's your take on the node operation standard?
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Adam, and good morning, everyone. If you're not familiar with the node operation standard, I like to kind of refer to it as like the Web 2 standard and the Web 3 set of standards we have, right? Like a lot of people sort of forget that everything in Web 3 is anchored some way in Web 2, and there's decades of Web 2 security that we need to distill and make available for a Web 3 audience, right? So the node operation standard really speaks to that. V1 was mostly a set of principles. It was best practices. V2 kind of grounds it all into like named requirements, making the requirements testable. And it's a version that we pushed out to be a bit more audit ready, right? So the BSSC is kind of growing into, growing from just creating these standards to actually working with industry and with the companies that are members to figure out how can we best create an audit framework around our standards and get them in the hands of companies that need them. So this was really getting the node operation standard up to that spec so that we can just very easily write a work for it. We added a few other things. There's like some cryptographic agility stuff. There's some post-quantum wording in there too. But again, it's largely a structural change.
Got it. So continued evolution, getting to the point where we can start putting it into an audit framework, making it auditable and accessible. So following up on that, so we have now sort of 5 published standards out there. How do they integrate with each other? How do they sort of connect? Is there sort of a, if you look at it, say, yeah, this makes sense because this is where it's evolving. I don't know, Max, I think, let me start with you if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. So like our standards are not siloed, right? The BSSC in our 2 working groups are collaborating on all of the standards, and As a result of that, we're not overlapping. In fact, all of our standards are kind of like puzzle pieces, right? They work together. The node operation standard, for example, builds on top of the key management standard, KMS, and then the general security and best practices standards. So we've tried to create an ecosystem that doesn't duplicate controls all over the place, and really just is a bit more agile, right? So then we have those like role specific layers, like the node operation standard or the token integration standard. Really, the point is to have like audit agility, increase adoption, make it easy for companies to be able to approach our standards. While we still have the option of doing that. We're small, we're opinionated, we can push these standards out in a way that they're useful now, right?
Awesome. And so we talked about kind of so we have these standards now, we've pushed out 5. I know there's others in the works we'll talk about, but Claire, from the board perspective for BSSC, we've got some standards, we can just keep pushing standards out, but that doesn't really get us kind of, I think, to where we need to be. What's sort of next from the BSSC? Where are we going next with this? How do we encourage adoption? What's the plan?
Yeah, to me, we need to spread the word wide and large across many different players in the industry. And I think we also need to make sure that we are accessible to the smallest of the smallest in that too. Those standards, this is the beginning of the journey. They are meant to be accessible to all and implementable to all. And in my experience, at least, smaller players tend to be a little more scared by those things, right? Because they don't necessarily have the resources or the means, or they don't think they're going to have the technical knowledge to do that. And so, to me, that's one of the objectives of the BSSC. We have to make sure that we are visible and accessible to those smallest players. And I know, Adam, that's something we've discussed and that we're working on. And we need that feedback as well from participants, from the community, right? If the standards is not as clear as we think it is, if it's not as good as we think it is, we need that feedback, right? This is something that's going to be important to make sure that we continue to evolve. I've used a lot of time the example of what we've done on the PCI side of things in the payment space, right? So payment card industry standards and data security standards that 20 years ago started with a relatively small standard, very straightforward. And if you look at today, like there are hundreds of standards under the PCI umbrella, and they are meant to cover how the industry evolved, how the different type of players play different roles to make sure they remain relevant, right? And so I envision that the BSCC will evolve in something similar, obviously relevant to the blockchain environment. So it's not going to be a copy-paste from what we've done in PCI, right? There are differences, obviously, and different players. But it has to evolve into something similar because to me, again, it comes down to trust. Trust cannot scale if you don't have those standards, right? So we have to make sure that we get to that. And also the message that good standards do not slow innovations. They actually remove what is avoidable friction, right?
No, that's good insight. I think your experience with PCI is important as we're looking at not just the larger companies, but how do we incorporate the broader ecosystem and the broader marketplace for that, so that they can kind of participate in that. And I think we've tried to do that with some of the general membership to have people have the ability to kind of come in, comment, look at our new standards, and hopefully that can continue to evolve and have them more and more involved. I know with PCI, you've put the standards out. They were sort of started at a baseline and then moved in. And part of that process was to put an assessment framework in, have assessments in there. I know, John, at Open Zeppelin, you guys do a lot of work around auditing. You're sort of known in the industry for that. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts around sort of how we move from just publishing these standards to get into auditing, getting an assessment framework in place, and the value around that.
Yeah, totally. And maybe I'll try and do a twofer here because I think I'd love to touch on stuff Max and Claire talked about earlier around, the nature of the BSSC standards. And I really do think what's unique about them is they're approachable for companies of any size, and they're written in a way that allow folks of any kind of background. I myself am not technical, but I led the smart contract security standard, and it makes sense, right? And there's examples, and I think, you know, a lot of folks get turned off, especially smaller companies, when they have a ton to do. They're trying to find product market fit, and you open up, you know, the ISO 27001 standard, which you got to pay for. It's behind a paywall, credit card and all that, or SOC 2, hundreds of pages of very high level outcome oriented things. And you can open up BSSC and go, hey, this is exactly what I need to achieve. It speaks to the nature of the technology, how it's implemented, which in many cases is inverted compared to Web 2 compute and the way, you know, organizations and systems are built. So I think the BSSC standards allow anyone, when they're starting out building an application on blockchain, to implement security best practices right away. And that's incredibly valuable, because at the end of the day, actually implementing those controls and following those controls is security. Now, when you go to the audit piece, an audit doesn't necessarily improve security in and of itself, right? You have an independent report that provides assurance that, yeah, those controls that they said they implemented are working properly. Now, what it does do is keep the organization accountable, right? Because you want to have a good, clean audit, you want to meet the standard, and you want to be able to show that to third parties. So what, you know, Max has done a great job in starting to build out the audit framework for the BSSC standards generally. We've got some of our brightest team members from our, you know, security audit practice looking through these standards and understanding what is the best way to test them. And really, it's when you pressure test them under an audit that you understand, you know, how congruent these are, you know, how well do they work, and do they need to be updated? And I think as we start to run more audits against BSSC standards, it'll also lead to a lot of improvements in the standards themselves, and it'll be an iterative process. Maybe I would just note, you know, the blockchain industry has thrown around the term audit quite loosely. I think, you know, for more comprehensive standards across multitudes of controls and risks, you know, this is not the exercise of going into his code and finding vulnerabilities. This is checking across all the requirements. I think in the SCSS, sorry, shouldn't use acronyms, the Smart Contract Security Standard, there's something like 64 controls or requirements. So, you know, that is more about demonstrating evidence that you've been doing that, you know, in the scope period. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity, especially for the protocols, applications, you know, stable coins, whatever it may be, that are really looking to show a higher level of assurance and independent, you know, certification regarding meeting really strong security practices, whether that's for regulatory bodies. You know, we're going to have Genius, and you're going to have to get licensed to issue a stable coin in the US, whether you're in MiCA jurisdiction. I think, you know, these audits will really help protocols prove that, and it also helps regulators understand what the people under their jurisdiction should be doing. Sorry, that was a long answer. Appreciate that.
No, but it's a comprehensive one. I think it's good to note sort of that we're not talking about, you know, sort of defining kind of what, when we say audit, it's sort of making clear kind of what it actually is. I know Max mentioned about the sort of node operation, the evolution around that. Tell me, John, like when you see the smart contract security standard, sort of that's a V1, there's, I think you said 64 different areas there for potentially for auditing. How do you see that evolving? Are there areas where you feel like we need to be delving deeper on to sort of improve that, or sort of where do you think it is in terms of sort of a V2? Are there things we need to kind of focus on to keep moving forward with it?
So from my perspective, I think, you know, the most important thing is to really make it clear what standard is valuable for what person. And I think blockchain technology is very composable. People talk about interoperability. You know, a single token or a single protocol might have smart contracts included in it. It might contemplate tokens. It may rely on nodes running properly. It may rely on oracles, etc. And then I think it's just understanding, what standards are relevant to what pieces, and then also just getting the ecosystem to come and stress test these and go, hey, am I meeting these security best practices? Why is this particular thing hard to meet or seems impossible or not relevant? And just contributing. And I think the fact like BSSC runs on GitHub, that's such an approachable environment and a collaborative environment for people to get involved and make changes and impact. You don't have to go through a lot of the bureaucracy that, I've seen in other organizations. So I think it's just folks using this stuff and iterating, right? Like any product anyone creates. So
Great, thank you. And then I know, John, you mentioned stablecoin. Max, you're co-chair of the tech working group. Kind of what standards are we sort of contemplating? What's next? Where are we looking to go now that we have this first 5 published?
That's a good question. I think the big one to highlight is something we're calling the blockchain transaction life cycle. I'm gonna get it at some point. Security standard. We just went through a renaming because we're trying to nail what this standard is supposed to be. But essentially it's a set of controls that try to remove the complexity around designing, maintaining, and securing systems that create, broadcast, sign, handle transaction or transaction data. So what we've discovered in the tech working group, as companies, we're all approaching this design problem differently. And there's a lot of different ways or boxes you can draw around what a transaction life cycle really looks like. So we've been, putting extra effort to make sure that this standard covers the sort of abstract layer of how these life cycles work. So everything from if you have a system over here that is responsible internally for generating a transaction based on some inputs, and you have to send it to a system over here, which is in your network, right? How do you make sure that you're doing that securely so that the transaction can't be changed in the middle, right? Like in your own network. How are you making sure that you have sort of attestations internally for your transaction data as it goes through different systems? So there isn't really a standard in open source now that really sort of tackles this problem. So we think it's underrepresented, and that's largely why we chose to work on it. And it's just super important, right? You don't want to serve like a bad transaction or sign a bad transaction. So yeah, that's the one I'm most excited for, and I'm assuming we're going to see that at some point this year.
Great. So more to come from BSSC and new standards, and then I want to touch on. I would really love to hear from kind of everyone on this. Is Max, you mentioned a little bit about quantum and post quantum, and we had a little bit in the node operation standard. But I mean, there's a lot of buzz around quantum computing coming. It's not that far off. We can argue about when that's actually going to happen, but I'd be curious to sort of your thoughts around what security risks that bring. Do these standards help at all? How should we be incorporating those? Thinking about quantum, and then obviously AI is the other piece that it continues to evolve and accelerate. I mean, what is that? Are there risks associated with that on securing blockchain, and are there benefits to it? I mean, where do we see that? I think sort of in traditional cyber, we hear that yes, there's good things and there's bad things about what AI is going to bring to it. So I'll let you start off on that, and then I think Claire and John, feel free to jump in with your thoughts around this topic.
Quantum and AI in the same question, so I'll try to be
Sure.
brief. Those are 2 behemoth topics.
You can take one, and we'll come back to the other if you want.
Okay, how about we start with quantum then? So
right.
I think the way I'm thinking about post-quantum readiness in Web3 is in 2 sort of phases, right? Or maybe 2 groups, right? There's the chains themselves behind the actual chains. different hashing algorithms, by different cryptographic algorithms. Those chains are responsible for making sure that the longevity of the chain sort of survives post-quantum computing, right? And all the major chains have roadmaps right now. And I'd really encourage anyone who's in this space to go book up on those roadmaps and to read them and understand them. Everyone, we're interacting with Web3 systems. Again, like we're interacting in Web2 space, so we're using apps and SDKs and a whole bunch of other things that exist in Web2 space. And there's a lot of crypto involved there, right? Just TLS underpins basically, most of how we interact with these things. And of course, in TLS, you can have all these different algorithms, and some are better than others. Some are post-quantum, secure, and some aren't. And really, like, there's a whole bunch of interplay in the supply chain. Like, it's messy. So really, I think it's sort of node operators, users, companies in the space to really assess what are you using across your fleet? How are you interacting with these different services? Right? Am I using the best available algorithm that get ready script later if you've heard that, right? So like the attack is right now your traffic can be scooped up and then saved for a later time when the compute actually exists to decrypt it. So it's really something we have to think about as an industry now. I'll hand the mic to someone else who wants to
talk. That's a lot to think about, Max. All right, Claire, any thoughts?
Yes. So, well, just for all types of payments that we support, and the way, right, it's a migration problem in some way, right? Is it going to happen? Yes. The timeline to the points that were made is still questionable. And so to me, the standards is what make this also migration possible at scale, right? I know I've said that a bunch of times today, but to me, those are the key takeaways from all this work. And so quantum computing, it threatens cryptography, obviously, and digital signatures in particular, right? So the ledger is not the risk we're talking about here necessarily. It's more the identity, the ownership, the integrity of the transaction. And the standards that we've been talking about today that the BSSC is putting forward, they don't necessarily solve for that quantum risk, but they introduce that discipline that is necessary and essential for us to be able to have security being more systematic, right? How do you improve key management? How you endorse lifecycle controls, as Max mentioned, right? How do you enable crypto agility? All of that is what we've done, in other. We do have a quantum resistant cryptography in the card space as well. So in my mind, there is nothing that stops this blockchain environment to build towards that as well. But again, it's like corralling cats in some way, a little bit like in that blockchain environment, right? We do need to corral all the cats, right? And to make sure that at least there is common ground and discipline around security to build that discipline that is necessary to make sure that we do become quantum resistant.
Least about quantum in this group, but I can tell you, over the last month to talk about blockchain security. Adam, your question came up in every single one. What impact is Mythos going to have on the blockchain industry, and what about quantum? And so I think from my perspective, and I think the BSSC standards are doing this already, they're forcing, that question and forcing teams to evaluate, what cryptography are we relying on? What networks are we deploying to, and what, quantum plan ready to have a thoughtful answer and plan and build that into the roadmap, right? And have as little, debt built up around what's going to potentially need to change, right, over time.
Great points. I think my head is going to be spinning from quantum and now AI moving forward. So why don't we, Max, I'll give you a shot here to start the AI discussion, and then we'll jump back to Claire and John as well.
Sure. So yeah, AI has, I think, filled everyone's gas tank in security, right? So both on the sort of the builders and the defenders, you have access to these very powerful tools that just like increase your agility to push code out, make changes. But the other side of the coin is that it also accelerates attackers and offensive security just as much. And I would even argue that it's asymmetric because attackers or defenders are always playing catch up. So, we're seeing things like bug bounty programs and disclosure programs just buckle under the weight of a bunch of new submissions. Some of them valuable, but a lot of them just low quality. You have a lot of people who are interested in security, who have access to these new tools, who might not be able to tell the difference between a legitimate vulnerability that an agent spat out versus not a real one. And this is just drowning defenders, right? Like it's messing with the real signal to noise ratio. It's burning out the actual humans behind these programs who have to fix these problems. And then, of course, is supply chain. I think it's the second time I've mentioned supply chain in the webinar, so maybe we'll get to 3. But attackers are ravaging supply chain right now, like the build pipeline, CI/CD, SDKs, all that kind of stuff. And it's largely driven by their offensive use of AI, right? You have groups like Team PCP and Shai Hulud copycats. So it's from the Web3 point of view, you really need to double down and understand what your supply chain looks like. And you really do have to invest on the defensive side. And you have to adopt these tools because the industry is adopting them, whether you like it or not. The attackers are adopting them. And the only way to keep up with the new speed of the race is to also put the gas in your tank.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'd say, it's so obviously AI lowers the cost and the scale of attacks, right? As Max, you described. But on the defender side, it also allows for real-time detection, anomaly analysis, faster incident responses as well. And it's a question of priority investment in some way on the defensive side as well, right? I agree with the supply chain risk too. I mean, we have been fighting for years for cyber vulnerabilities, unpatched systems, right? Unpatched software, which sounds very simple. And for the most part, it is to patch things up. It's like it's similar to, whatever personal cell phones we have, each of us, right? Our phones tell us when they need an upgrade. How quickly do you do it, right? And the more you wait, the more you're making yourself vulnerable, right? And that's the same in this. And the more everybody else delays, and there's more than one iOS, more than one software, unfortunately, in all these different players, right? So the scale is the issue, and AI kind of closes that gap for the criminals. But I would argue it can close it for the defenders as well. Just a question of investment and priority, right? Now, Adam, to try to answer your question on quantum and AI, to me, what AI does, it just, right? So it just, maybe, criminals can now use the advances in quantum and all of that to try to accelerate how quickly you can defeat systems and how quickly you can scale even more attacks, right? But I just view AI as an accelerator, maybe not an accelerator in the research, although maybe as well, because some of those models, as we see, they're evolving pretty quickly and they're getting pretty smart, right? That's scaring a lot of people. So maybe, but yeah, to me, I think it's AI is a bigger threat at the moment that we need to try to get a handle on, and investment and priority. And then quantum will come next.
Makes sense. I think we hear because quantum is sort of when it's going to get here is still a little bit up for debate, but obviously AI is here. It's accelerating at a quicker pace. But focus also
to worry about quantum. That's not what I'm saying, right? It just
Right.
we
No,
still
no,
have to
no,
do
for
what
sure.
I talked about before, but it just from a threat standpoint, AI is here now, quantum is coming,
Right.
right?
Right. Be prepared for both.
Yeah.
John, do you have thoughts on the AI side?
From Open Zeppelin's perspective, we've conducted close to 1,000 security audits looking at code. At least our methodology has always involved two super bright, effectively white hat hackers looking for vulnerabilities. And I mean, it's been amazing just to see the pace of how the technology, you know, good actors in the cybersecurity field, right, that are also using this to power their defensive technologies, as Max and Claire, described. So I think we feel very well equipped to meet this, challenge head on. And I think, we're seeing tremendous results, and it's also, I would say, democratizing access to, the really powerful kind of expertise that, only, it seems crazy, but like we could measure months ago was only possible by hiring a human, and their sleep schedule and demand, right? Which, has always been tough in our space, where when things get busy, it might be tough to get the right security capable AI tooling. You can embed it in your development workflow, so it's quicker because like the assumptions around, are just, those timelines are drastically changing. And I mean, in blockchain, right, if you're in production, that's always been kind of the thing we've been dealing with, right, is that's exploitable. There's no safe rollback. And so you better find that, nature of the security industry and blockchain in a very exciting way that, is benefiting, I think, everyone involved.
Lots to think about on both quantum, and I'm actually going to kind of take these two together and just kind of open it up to the panelists. So, the one question is about, but sort of why do we need standards? Why are they important to have? And then, we talked about both, John, you're at Open, the smart contract standard. Max, you're the editor, with standard. But are these standards agnostic to the company? Are they written to sort of, hey, this is a Figment standard, or is this really an industry standard? Does it apply across the board to everyone? Can if I'm a different company trying to do node operation standard, we're not Open Zeppelin on smart contracts. So I'll throw those two together to kind of jump out.
That's a really good question, and I think both questions are tied together. So the answer is quite simply no. These are not Figment standards. They're not Open Zeppelin standards. They're not MasterCard standards. Whatever it is, that defeats the point of a standard, in my opinion. The standard should be broad and approachable, I guess, is the really, they're written to be generic and useful across multiple chains, multiple ecosystems, because the point is adoption. The point is to, raise the bar, like Claire said, for the whole industry, and get people at a better level in terms of security. And that goes for like the company with tens of thousands of employees, or the two people in their garage that are pushing out a new app or something, right? Yeah.
Any other John or Claire thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe this is an overshare, but this is the first time I've been involved in actually creating a standard end to end, like contributed to things like ISO in small capacities. But I think, well, and also too, I would preface this by saying, like, our industry is, I would say, quite guilty of just calling anything new a standard, and because it's whatever public or open source, it's like this is the standard. And really, I think standards, that term needs to be reserved for things that are really developed with a wide cohort of different actors across the ecosystem. Competitors should be all involved to define these things so that they really represent an industry standard. And if they don't get adopted, also I don't know that it's necessarily a standard, but OpenZep1 has very strong opinions about what are smart contract security best practices. So when I led this standard, I thought, naively, this might take a month or two, but I could draft this thing in a weekend. And that did not happen. It took almost a year to actually get that standard out. But it's really amazing to look back on and reflect on that, because we had 10, 20, 30 contributors from very respectable companies that all play in the same space, and you see it get shaped and tested and chipped away at. And what you're left with is actually something that really is and feels like a standard, and it's not some branded thing or opinionated thing, but something that is useful and can really hold up to scrutiny and challenge. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing. I think BSSC strikes a really good balance between being able to actually get things done and incorporate that feedback, but not kind of drag things out over years and years, and getting stuff in the hands of people early and then iterating on it. So I think if you just look, I can speak to the smart contract security standard, but the types of people and the caliber of and intelligence and expertise that went into that, I think really shows that this is a robust framework.
Yeah. I mean, to me, Adam, it's simple. I think I said this before, right? Trust does not scale without standards, period. It's about trust. And, and that trust translates to even what the consumers are doing, right? Because it translates to, at least there is consistency in what to expect in the experience when you're using blockchain, whatever company, wallet, whatever, for payments. What you can expect in terms of experience, but in terms of protection when something goes wrong as well, right? This is what allows you to do all of that. Without standards, can't do it, right? So this is all about trust.
I think it's a good way to summarize it, Claire, just about like you need to have that the standards and that confidence for everybody up and down to build that trust out and to sort of to help innovate, to your point, and kind of move industry forward. If there's other questions, please put them in the Q&A, and while we take a look at that, I just want to see if any of you want to have any sort of final comments as we think through that, on the smart contract standard, on the node operation standard, just in general. Claire, on the broader approach to standards and kind of, MasterCard, coming on board, you're not, don't come from the Web3 space originally. I mean, obviously you're coming as a more traditional financial institution, and sort of why the shift, what made you want to come over here to BSSC and be a part of that. So I'll let you answer that, and then we'll see if John and Max have final thoughts around the standards that they've worked on.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot packed into that question. So, yes, MasterCard, trusted brand. There's a lot of learnings that we bring in experience, and I often say the criminals trying to defraud the system, they're not just card criminals, right? Or wire transfer criminals or blockchain criminals. Resistance, right? And those paths of least resistance are not that different from one technology to the next, from one environment to the next. And so why not benefit from all that knowledge and experience that we have, right, in that blockchain environment? Why start from AI? As part of the impetus as to why now, why this? Because there's a lot that we can bring to the table. And again, to the point MasterCard standards. Standards, but those are not MasterCard. And some of our competitors hopefully will be joining as well on this, right? The same way we work with our competitors on other industry bodies. That's still on things, but at the end of the day, it's finding that common core among everybody to defeat those criminals, to make their lives difficult, right? That's why, to me, it's important to be here, to share that expertise, that experience, and to really help those standards scale.
Awesome. Well, we certainly appreciate having MasterCard's engagement and the perspective that you bring. And to your point, we hope we get some of your competitors to come in and help share that as well. John, anything on the smart contract standard that you want to kind of close with, add in?
I mean, so I lead legal and policy at OpenZeppelin. I think we said that in the intro. So maybe I would just, because someone might ask, and folks in our company ask, John, how are you involved in the standards work on behalf of OpenZeppelin? How does that fit with your role? And I just want clarity around digital assets and blockchain technology generally, things like the Genius Act in the US, maybe clarity, but abroad already existing frameworks. What we're seeing with a lot of our clients, financial institutions that are already regulated, or folks who really do want to, offer services and build that trust of being a regulated entity, they look at the regulatory requirements and they think, well, how does this apply to blockchain? Because a lot of the cybersecurity and operational resilience requirements are very high-level, principles-based, outcome-based requirements. And an example, right, is in Europe, the same cybersecurity rules apply to you under DORA, whether you're offering crypto asset services or traditional financial services. So, that is obviously very high level. And then, folks, especially on the, moving into Web3 from other areas, whether it's enterprises, TradFi, they go, well, what are the specific things I should be doing to meet those high level principles? And there just isn't a lot of widely adopted standards out there that really show you, hey, if you're building, a stable coin or some kind of DeFi protocol, what are all the steps I need to be taking? And I think this, the work of the BSSC and other standards bodies and even open source is very helpful to start to fill in and color in those gaps that are really missing and, leaving a lot of folks scratching their heads still today. So.
All right. Thank you, John. And Max, we'll give you kind of the final word here if you have any closing comments.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat too much of what John and Claire said, because I think it's exactly how I would have led it on, but I do want to double down on getting just the value of having other opinions in a forum where you're trying to accomplish what the BSSC is trying to accomplish has been fantastic. I echo what John said, where he thought he could push out a standard in a few weeks, and it ends up being way more than that, because you're looking at it through the lens that you've approached this problem, how you're buying down that risk in your company and in your experience. And in reality, we're all facing the same risks, but we're choosing to buy down that risk in different ways, and we're maybe making systems, or we've sort of bought it down in different ways. And the only way to tease that out is to have discussions with peers, and it's to get other opinions. So I guess the last word would be a call to action, right? We're onboarding a lot of members. BSSC is growing. There's room for very small companies like Figment and very large companies like MasterCard and everything in between. We really want those opinions at the table.
All right. Thank you, Max. We did get one, looks like last question in. Let me just see if I can find it here. I think it's in the chat. All right, let me see if I can get this and then we'll close. Could a security posture standard help bridge the gap between a periodic audit and continuous assurance in Web3, like in like in Web 2, ASPM and CSPM become foundational for continuous security. I don't know if Max or anyone has thoughts on that. You're the security architect, so I turn to you first on it. And if not, we can come up with an answer, and that we will respond by writing on that one. If not,
I don't think I'm educated enough on those two standards to give an appropriate response, but you give me something to look into. And again, we can, whatever mechanism we have to get an answer back to participants in the webinar, I think that would be a good thing. We can follow up.
Sure. Okay. And we are happy to do that, to respond, and we'll get back to you. With that, we have, I think everyone who's registered, we have their contact information, so we'll be able to do that. But I just want to thank everyone for joining today, and thank the panelists, Claire and John and Max, for their insights and their work, and for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for joining. I hope you'll check out the BSSC and the work we're doing. And we'd love to, as I think all the panelists said, the more the merrier for us. It helps us build better standards and do better work to help the industry promote innovation and help provide more confidence in blockchain. So with that, I'll say thank you, and we look forward to having you at our next webinar in the near future. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.